The village of San Isidro clung to the jagged slopes of the Cordillera Mountains like an old festering wound that refused to heal. Hemmed in by emerald jungles and veiled in perpetual mist, it existed in a liminal space where the modern world's reach grew thin and brittle. Tin roofs rattled under nightly monsoons, their dissonant symphony punctuated by the howls of stray dogs and the low, mournful creaking of bamboo groves bending under the weight of the storms. Here the air hung thick with the scent of wet earth, rotting durian. And something else, something the elders refused to name but whispered about in the dim glow of kerosene lamps after sundown. They spoke of Aswangs nesting in the skeletal kapok trees, their leathery wings folded tight like umbrellas as they watched the village with hollow, hungry eyes. Superstition bled into every crack of San Isidro's existence. Salt sprinkled on doorsteps, Karalik braids dangling from windows, rosary beads clutched in calloused hands during the treacherous walk home from the rice fields. Fear was a currency here, traded in hushed tones and sideways glances, and it thrived in the damp shadows between the shanties. Among them walked Selina, the last Kwentong Aswang ghost draped in human skin. By daylight, she was a vision of impossible grace. Her raven hair cascaded down her back like spilled ink, framing a face of haunting symmetry. High cheekbones dusted with the village's ever-present red clay, lips the color of crushed guava and eyes like dark honey, warm enough to melt the suspicion of the sternest albulario. She moved through the crowded marketplace with an ethereal lightness, her borrowed saya dress whispering against her ankles, a woven basket balanced on her hip. She traded sweet smiles for dried fish and cassava, complimented the weavers on their vibrant tanalic cloth, and sang snippets of forgotten lullabies to fussy infants. The vendors adored her. The mothers envied her poise. The young men lingered near the sari-sari store just to catch her laughter, bright and deceptive as wind chimes. But their admiration was a fragile shield. Celine felt their eyes follow her not with desire, but with the primal unease of prey sensing a predator's perfect camouflage. She saw it in the way old man Tatu's knuckles whitened around his bolo knife when she passed his hut, or how the children's games fell silent until she rounded the bend in the path. Beneath the meticulously crafted facade, Celine was unraveling. The hunger was a living thing inside her, a coiled serpent that gnawed at her ribs and scraped its scales against her spine. It had grown more insistent, more savage. Since the last of her kind had been hunted down and burned on a pyre of blessed wood beyond the river, she remembered Lyra's screams as the silver-tipped spears pierced her wings, and the way Bunita's human skin had bubbled and blackened when doused in holy water. Their deaths left Celine achingly alone, the sole remnant of a lineage as old as the volcanic bones of the mountains. She was a relic, a mistake, a creature caught between two worlds and belonging to neither. The village was her cage, but the jungle beyond its borders was a graveyard echoing with the ghosts of her sisters. When the last sliver of sun vanished behind Mount Tiger and the village plunged into the indigo embrace of true night, Selina's carefully constructed world dissolved. Locked inside her crumbling nipa huts whose walls, stained with mildew and smelling of damp hashe, she would kneel on the packed earth floor, trembling. The transformation wasn't a swift, magical shift, but a grotesque unraveling. It began with a sickening crackle deep within her bones, like dry twigs snapping underfoot. Her spine arched violently, vertebrae elongating and pushing against her skin, as if desperate to escape. The warm honey of her eyes bled into a luminous, predatory yellow, pupils narrowing to vertical slits. Her fingernails darkened, thickened, and curled into obsidian talons that scraped furrows into the dirt floor. The worst was the skin. It didn't merely fall away. It peeled, sloughing off her emerging form like a wet, discarded cocoon, revealing the monstrous truth beneath. Leathery, bat-like wings, mottled gray and veined with purple, unfurling with a sound like tearing parchment. A torso taut with wiry muscle, jaw that distended with a wet pop, revealing rows of needle-sharp fangs that glistened under the weak moonlight filtering through the bamboo slats. The discarded human skin lay in a pale, crumpled heap near the hearth, a grotesque mockery of the woman the villagers knew. Hunting was no longer a ritual of power, but a desperate scramble for survival. The plump chickens and lazy pigs of San Isidro were shielded behind charms and crucifixes, their pens humming with protective energies that stung Selina's heightened senses like wasp nests. She was forced to the fringes, to the rotting edges where the jungle clawed back at the village. Stray dogs, ribs visible beneath mangy fur, were her meager bounty. She'd descend upon them from the inky sky, a silent shadow, her talons finding purchase in their necks before they could yelp. Their blood was thin, bitter, barely enough to quiet the serpent in her gut. Sometimes driven to the brink, she'd risk the outskirts of neighboring barrios, snatching a sickly goat or a forgotten cat. Her heart pounding not with triumph, but with the paralyzing fear of discovery. The taste of blood was ash in her mouth, a constant reminder of her damnation. She'd return to her hut before the first cockcrow wings, aching, the stench of fear and decay clinging to her monstrous form. She'd step back into the cooling, empty husk of her human skin, the edges sealing with a faint, sickening sizzle. As dawn painted the sky in bruised hues of pink and gray, Celine would stare at her reflection in a shard of broken mirror, the beautiful, hollow-eyed girl, staring back, and feel the profound, suffocating weight of her solitude. She was the last. A phantom haunting her own life, a scream trapped behind a perfect smile, forever tasting the coppery temps of stolen scraps in the dark. While the whispers of the kapok trees carried the promise of an extinction she couldn't outrun. And somewhere deep in the suffocating blackness of the primordial swamp beyond the village, something ancient and foul stirred, drawn not by the scent of her prey, but by the intoxicating perfume of her despair. The monsoon rains didn't merely fall on San Isidro, they drowned it. For weeks the sky wept gray sheets that turned the narrow footpaths into treacherous rivers of slick red mud. The jungle pressed closer, vines snaking over fences, ferns unfurling monstrously in the perpetual damp. The air hung thick and suffocating, saturated with the cloying sweetness of rotting mangoes, the sharp temps of wet earth, and the underlying, ever-present musk of decay that seeped from the swamp beyond the village boundaries. Night, already a time of dread, became a waterlogged tomb. The rhythmic drumming on the tin roofs was a constant, maddening thrum, drowning out the usual nocturnal chorus, leaving only the gurgle of overflowing ditches and the occasional distant slide of mud off the mountain slopes. It was in this drowning world that Celine felt the first true prickle of unease that had nothing to do with her own monstrous nature. Her hunts had become desperate, miserable affairs. The stray dogs, wary and starved themselves, had grown scarce or learned to vanish into the flooded undergrowth. The meager sustenance, she gleaned. A waterlogged rat snatched from a collapsing burrow, half-drowned monitor lizard sluggish with cold, barely took the edge off the gnawing void inside her. The hunger was a constant, grinding pain now, a cold fire in her veins that warred with the damp chill clinging to her monstrous form. Flying was laborious. Her wings, heavy with absorbed moisture, beat the sodden air with a weary, wet slap. She felt exposed, vulnerable, a creature of shadow forced to navigate a world turned hostile and alien by the relentless deluge. It was near the old crumbling Spanish cemetery, perched precariously on a ridge overlooking the swollen river, that she first sensed it, not with sight, for the fog was a living thing, a dense, swirling white blindness that swallowed trees whole just meters away, not with sound, masked by the rain's roar. It was a presence. A shift in the very texture of the air, a sudden localized chill that cut through the general dampness like an icy blade. It carried a scent, faint at first beneath the petrichor and decay, but unmistakable. Wet rot, like ancient wood crumbling in a forgotten cellar. And beneath that, something metallic and stagnant, like the water at the bottom of a neglected well. It was the smell of the deepest, most primordial swamp, of things buried and forgotten. Celine froze midair, hovering with effort, her yellow eyes straining against the fog. Her wings beat slower, almost silent. The serpent of hunger coiled tighter, but now laced with something new. Primal fear. This wasn't the wary suspicion of villagers or the clumsy aggression of drunken hunters patrolling with blessed bolos. This felt older, hungrier in a different way. Toriate, guess, but with a patience that spoke of eons. She remembered fragments of whispered lore from her childhood, tales traded in the fearful dark by her dwindling kin. Stories not just of holy men and hunters, but of other things that walked the liminal spaces, things that predated even the Aswang. Things born not of cursed lineage, but of the land's own dark bile. Binatang. The word itself was like a curse, rarely spoken aloud. A creature of pestilence and vengeance, a manifestation of the swamp's consuming anger. For nights, the feeling persisted. A flicker of movement at the edge of her vision, swallowed instantly by the fog or the curtain of rain. A deeper patch of shadow under the dripping Nira trees that seemed to breathe. The unnatural silence that would fall in a small pocket of jungle just before she entered it, as if every insect, every frog, had choked on its own song. And always that smell. Stronger some nights, fainter others, but never entirely gone. It trailed her. Not aggressively, not overtly stalking, but observing, fixated. Where other creatures, even other predators, recoiled from the unnatural aura of the Aswang, this presence seemed drawn to it. Drawn to her. One night, desperation, overcoming caution, she ventured deeper into the flooded lowlands near the river's bend, where the mangroves formed a tangled, half-submerged labyrinth. The water was black and still, littered with bloated carcasses of small animals caught in the flood. The stench of decay was overpowering. She landed silently on a gnarled root protruding from the ink-dark water, hoping perhaps for a drowned pig or goat caught in the roots. As she bent, talons extended to probe the murk, the water bubbled beside her. Not the natural gurgle of swamp gas, but a thick, viscous eruption. Slowly, deliberately, something began to rise. It wasn't a shape easily defined. It was a coalescence of the shadows and the water itself. Hulking was an understatement. It seemed to absorb the dim moonlight, a mass of dripping vegetation, slick mud, and things that squirmed in the wetness. Leeches. Blind white worms, strands of slime-covered algae. It had no distinct form, shifting and settling like a mound of animate rot. But within the shifting murk, 2 points of light ignited, not the fiery yellow of her own eyes, but a dull, smoldering red, like dying embers in a doused fire. They fixed on her, unblinking, radiating an intelligence that was ancient and utterly alien. The smell intensified, a physical assault that made Selena's gorge rise, decay, stagnation, and an underlying, acrid tang of pure corruption. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through her. She launched herself backward, wings beating furiously, spraying fetid water. She didn't think, didn't plan. Pure instinct drove her towards the higher ground, towards the relative, though false, sanctuary of the cemetery. She crashed through the sodden undergrowth, thorns tearing at her leathery hide, the heavy slap of her wings echoing too loudly in the muffled world. She burst into the clearing of the cemetery, landing unsteadily amidst the tilted, moss-covered tombstones and sunken graves oozing mud. The fog was thinner here, but the rain still fell in icy sheets. She whirled, chest heaving, fangs bared in a silent snarl. It was there. At the edge of the trees, it hadn't pursued with speed, but with an inevitable, terrifying slowness. It flowed from the jungle like a landslide of decay, its form seeming to absorb the rain rather than be wetted by it. It stopped at the tree line, the ember eyes burning into her. The silence stretched, broken only by the rain and Selena's own ragged breathing. She felt exposed, cornered, amidst the symbols of human death that offered her no solace. She hissed, a sound like steam escaping a cracked pipe, her wings flaring wide to make herself appear larger, more threatening. She tensed, ready to fight or flee, though both options felt futile against this. This presence, it didn't attack, didn't roar. It simply stood, a monument to putrefaction, watching her. Then, from deep within the shifting mass of mud and rot, a sound emerged. Not a growl, not a word, but a wet guttural rasp, like stones grinding together at the bottom of a bog. It vibrated through the ground, through the rain-laden air, and settled in Selena's bones with a chilling certainty. A single syllable, thick with swamp water and malice, yet carrying an unnerving, possessive weight. Mine. Dawn arrived not with color, but with a reluctant lightening of the oppressive gray that had smothered San Isidro for weeks. The rain had dwindled to a persistent cold drizzle, turning the world into a watercolor of mud and dripping green. Exhaustion weighed Celine down like stones sewn into her human skin.
As.
The transformation back had been agonizingly slow, her monstrous form reluctant to be contained, the edges of her skin stinging as they knit together over the raw alien musculature beneath. The memory of the cemetery, of those dying ember eyes, and the guttural, possessive rasp echoing through the downpour, clung to her like the swamp's fetid stench. Fear, cold and unfamiliar in its specific flavor, coiled in her gut alongside the ever-present gnawing hunger. She had barely slept, curled on her damp sleeping mat, every creak of the bamboo, every drip from the leaking roof, a potential herald of the Binatang's return. Stepping out into the gray morning light felt like venturing into a battlefield. The air, thick with moisture and the scent of sodden earth, still carried a faint, unsettling taint of that deeper decay. She needed water from the communal well. The walk was a gauntlet. Every villager's gaze felt heavier, more scrutinizing. Old woman Aling Rosa crossed herself openly as Celine passed, clutching her rosary tight. Tomas's arrival had sharpened their vigilance, their fear honed into a weapon. Celine kept her eyes downcast, her smile fragile, her basket held tight. The hunger was a hollow ache, a constant tremor in her hands. The thought of another night hunting scraps in the flooded mire filled her with a dread deeper than the fear of the hunter. A dark shape slumped against her flimsy bamboo door. Her breath hitched. A dead dog? Perhaps a wild pig caught in the floods? Hope, brittle and dangerous, flickered. Meat, fresh meat. She quickened her pace, the hunger momentarily overriding caution. But as she drew closer, the details resolved, and the flicker of hope died, replaced by a wave of cold revulsion. It was a wild boar. A large one, easily the size of a small calf. But its death wasn't the work of flood or accident. It lay with a terrible, deliberate stillness. Its thick hide was unmarked by teeth or claws, no sign of a struggle. Its powerful legs were tucked neatly beneath it, its massive head resting almost peacefully on the mud-slicked bamboo step. It looked placed, arranged, like an obscene tribute. The most horrifying detail, however, was the gaping cavity in its chest. The ribs had been pried apart with immense, brutal strength, creating a ragged, dark hole. Inside, the viscera glistened wetly in the gray light. Lungs, liver, coiled intestines, all untouched. Unnervingly intact, but the heart was gone. Cleanly excised, vanished. Only a slick, dark hollow remained where the vital organ should have been. Cold knot tightened in Selena's stomach. This wasn't a predator's kill. Predators ate the organs first. This was a message, a gift from it. The stench of fresh blood and open carcass mingled with the pervasive damp and faintly with the unmistakable underlying odor of swamp rot and stagnant water. The Binatang's signature. Disgust warred violently with the raw, screaming need in her belly. Her stomach clenched painfully, saliva flooding her mouth, despite the revulsion churning within her. This was carrion, offered by a nightmare. To touch it was to accept its tainted attention. To eat it was unthinkable. Yet the hunger was a tyrant, a relentless torturer. The memory of the thin, bitter dog's blood, the near starvation of the past weeks pressed in. The villagers' guarded stares, Tomas's inevitable hunt. She needed strength. Strength to flee, to survive. With trembling hands, driven by a shame that burned hotter than any holy water, Celine dragged the heavy, still-warm carcass inside her hut. The smell intensified in the confined space, thick and metallic. She barred the flimsy door, her heart hammering against her ribs. She stared at the boar, its dead eyes milky and vacant. The hunger won. With a choked sob that was part despair, part ravenous need, she fell upon it. Her human teeth felt blunt, useless, but the Aswang within her surged close to the surface. She tore into the warm flesh at the shoulder, ripping chunks free, swallowing them almost whole. The blood, still lukewarm, ran down her chin, staining her dress, pooling on the packed earth floor like black syrup. It was rich, thick, bursting with life force she hadn't tasted in months. She gorged, the primal act momentarily silencing the horror, the fear, the crushing loneliness. The serpent in her gut uncoiled, sated, purring with dark satisfaction. Only when the frantic edge of starvation subsided did the reality crash back. She sat amidst the gore, blood sticky on her hands and face, the remnants of the boar ruined before her. The scent of decay, its scent, seemed embedded in the very walls now. What had she done? The offering wasn't an isolated incident. It was the opening move in a terrifying, silent courtship. The next night, returning weary and empty talent from another futile hunt, she found a massive python coiled on her doorstep. It's not just dead, but meticulously crushed, its powerful musculature pulped, bones shattered within its patterned skin. Its head was untouched, the lidless eyes staring blankly at the starless sky, its jaws slightly agape, as if frozen in a silent scream. Again, the heart was missing. Celine stared at it, the cold fear intensifying. The binatang wasn't just watching, it was hunting for her, providing, asserting its claim. She dragged the heavy serpent inside, the act feeling heavier each time, a dreadful acceptance of this monstrous bond. The python's flesh was cold, tougher, but the blood was potent, easing the ache in her bones. Then came the calf. A young, tawny creature, its coat still soft, lay on its side near her hut, legs stiff. This time, the horror had a new layer. Around its neck, woven crudely from thorny vines, was a makeshift crucifix. It was a mockery, a blasphemous joke, only something intimately aware of human and Aswang fears would conceive. The thorns had dug into the calf's neck, drawing beads of dried blood. The heart, again, was gone. Celine retched, the rich blood she'd consumed earlier turning sour in her stomach. The binatang understood. It understood the symbols that warded her away, the faith that hunted her, and it was defiling them. For her. She took the calf, the thorny crucifix burning her fingers like actual holiness, as she tore it off and flung it into the bushes. The act felt like a surrender. The final offering shattered any pretense of this being merely about sustenance. It was impaled on the sharpened bamboo stakes of her fence, a tiny, twisted figure no larger than a human toddler, but ancient and grotesque. A duende, a dwarf spirit. Its normally mischievous, earth-toned features were contorted in an eternal rictus of agony. Thorns, similar to those used in the calf's crucifix, had been driven through its limbs and torso, pinning it upright like a macabre insect specimen. Its small, pointed ears were torn, its mossy beard matted with dark, viscous fluid that wasn't quite blood. Its heart, too, was missing, leaving a small, dark cavity in its chest. This wasn't food. This was a trophy. Display of power over the very spirits of the land. A warning and a gift so perverse it stole Celine's breath. This creature, this binatang, had killed a spirit for her. Not for sustenance, but for acknowledgement, possession. She couldn't bring herself to touch it. She left it hanging there, a dreadful ornament, a testament to the terrifying depth of the beast's obsession. That night, as she huddled inside, the stench of the rotting duende seeping through the bamboo walls, she felt its gaze. Not just a sense, but a physical pressure. Slowly, trembling, she peered through a gap in the wall. Deep within the moon-dappled shadows of the bamboo grove, darker than the surrounding night, two ember eyes glowed. They weren't watching the hut. They were watching her through the crack. A low, wet gurgle, like mud bubbling in a sinkhole, vibrated through the ground. It wasn't threatening. It was expectant. Waiting. Celine recoiled, pressing her back against the rough wall, sliding down to the floor. She wrapped her arms around herself, the human skin feeling thin, fragile, utterly inadequate. The offerings had been horrifying, repulsive, a descent into a nightmare. Yet, in the hollow ache of her existence, the relentless gnawing solitude that had been her only companion for so long, the binatang's monstrous devotion felt like a perverse, terrifying warmth. It saw her. Not the mask, not the beautiful girl, but the monster. And it desired her. It was a trap, she knew, a snare woven from rot and obsession. But as the ember eyes continued to watch from the darkness, Celine found herself trembling, not just from fear, but from the terrifying realization that a part of her was beginning to crave that corrupt, unwavering attention. The hunger in her belly was quieted, but a new, darker hunger, born of profound isolation and the chilling allure of being claimed, was stirring in its place. The sated warmth from the binatong's grotesque offerings was a fleeting illusion, burned away by the relentless furnace of Selena's true nature. The rich blood of the boar, the python, even the calf, had momentarily silenced the serpent in her gut, but its respite was deceptive. The deeper hunger, the one that craved not just sustenance but the vital life force unique to thinking beings, was stirring with a vengeance, whispered in her veins like a fever. A mounting pressure behind her eyes that turned the vibrant greens of the jungle into sickly, jaundiced hues. The villagers' fear, once a distant hum, now vibrated against her skin like plucked wires. Their heartbeats, muffled by walls and distance, thudded in her skull like distant, tempting drums. The Aswang essence suppressed during her daylight charade, roiled close to the surface, making the human skin feel like a straitjacket sewn from spiderwebs. Every smile she forced in the marketplace felt like cracking ice over an abyss. Every casual touch from a villager sent jolts of predatory awareness through her, a terrifying urge to dig in and pull out the warm, pulsing core within. It was little Benji who pushed her to the precipice. The fisherman's youngest son, a boy of maybe 5 summers, with wide, trusting eyes and a laugh like tinkling bells. He'd always been drawn to Selene's ethereal beauty, weaving her garlands of bruised jungle flowers, chattering about the fantastical fish his father almost caught. His innocence was a beacon in the village's gloom, a stark, painful contrast to Selena's inner corruption. And now, Benji was sick. It's not the usual childhood sniffles, but a wasting illness that struck like a viper. His plump cheeks hollowed overnight, his skin taking on a waxy gray pallor. His bright eyes grew dull, clouded with a lethargy that no albulario's herbs could dispel. The whispers started, low and venomous, slithering through the damp alleys. Aswang's sickness. They pointed not just with words, but with eyes, heavy and accusing, towards Selena's hut. Tomas the hunter sharpened his silvered blades with renewed fervor, his gaze lingering on her longer, colder. Selene watched from the shadows of her doorway as Benji's mother, Lingma writes, carried the limp child to the albulario's hut once more. The boy's small hand dangled, lifeless as a doll's. The scent of his illness hit Selene like a physical blow, not the smell of infection, but the intoxicating, cloying perfume of fading life force. It was weak, flickering like a guttering candle, but it was pure, untainted by the bitterness of animal blood. The serpent in her gut uncoiled with a violent lurch, its fangs sinking deep into her resolve. The gnawing void became a yawning chasm, screaming to be filled. Logic, fear, the memory of her sister's burning, all were consumed in the white-hot roar of the hunger. Tonight, it had to be tonight. The boy was weak, vulnerable. A quick strike, deep in the moonless dark. No one would know. She could drain just enough to silence the agony, to regain the strength to flee before Tomas closed his net. The justification was a flimsy shroud over raw need, but she clung to it. Midnight found her a shadow detached from the world, perched on the gnarled branch of a bolete tree overlooking Benji's small nipa hut. The village slept, drowned in the monotonous symphony of crickets and dripping water. It's only the weak, erratic flicker of an oil lamp from the sick-room window broke the darkness.
Ow.
Selene's monstrous form was taut, every muscle coiled. Her wings, held tight to her back, vibrated with suppressed energy. Her yellow eyes dilated wide, fixed on the thin bamboo wall separating her from the fading pulse within. She could almost taste it, the sweet, coppery essence, the warmth spreading through her desiccated core. One swift dive, silent talons through the thatch. A hand clamped over the small mouth. A quick, merciful puncture. She tensed, preparing to become the nightmare they all believed her to be. The earth beneath the bolete tree exploded. Not with sound, but with a violent upheaval of mud, roots, and decaying vegetation. A wave of putrid stench, thick and choking, engulfed Selene a fraction of a second before a massive mud-slicked limb erupted from the ground. It wasn't an arm, not truly. It was a club-like appendage formed of compacted soil, writhing roots and things that glistened wetly in the gloom, moved with terrifying speed. Wrapping around Selena's left wrist with the crushing finality of a landslide. The grip wasn't cold. It was a searing brand of pure decay. Felt like immersion in boiling tar laced with acid. Her obsidian talons scraped uselessly against the impossible amalgamation of earth and rot. A choked cry escaped her, not of pain alone, but of utter shock and violation. The binatang had been waiting, not just observing, but guarding. Before she could react, before she could even fully comprehend the assault, she was ripped from her perch. The world became a sickening blur of rushing darkness and the agonizing burn in her wrist.
Ow.
The binatang didn't fly, it flowed. It dragged her through the sodden undergrowth, its passage silent but for the wet-sucking sound of mud parting and reforming around its bulk. Trees seemed to bend away from its pestilential aura. They plunged downhill, away from the village, away from the sleeping child, deeper into the heart of the flooded lowlands, where the mangroves stood like sentinels in the black water. Celine struggled, beating her wings against the suffocating embrace of the jungle. But the grip on her wrist was absolute, an anchor dragging her down into nightmare. It stopped in a small, stagnant clearing choked with reeds and the skeletal remains of drowned trees. Moonlight, weak and filtered through the thick canopy, cast long, distorted shadows. The binatang released her wrist, the sudden absence of the burning grip, leaving a throbbing numbness. Celine stumbled back, gasping, cradling her injured limb. The flesh beneath her monstrous hide was blistered, an angry red wheal already forming where the rot had touched her. She whirled to face it, fury and terror warring within her, fangs bared in a silent shriek. The creature loomed before her, a shifting mountain of dripping filth and shadow. Its ember eyes blazed with an intensity she hadn't seen before. Not rage, exactly. Something more profound, more terrifying. It tilted its massive, indistinct head. From the depths of its form, a wet, guttural sound emerged, layered with the gurgle of swamp water and the grind of stones. Not ... innocent. The words, if they could be called that, struck her like a physical blow. It wasn't forbidding her to feed. It was forbidding her to feed on that, the innocent child. The implication hung in the fetid air, thick and suffocating. There are rules, even for monsters. The sheer alien morality of it, emanating from this entity of pure corruption, left Celine reeling. Then, the binatang did something utterly unexpected, raised one of its massive mud-clotted limbs. It's not to strike, but to present. With a slow, deliberate movement, as if performing a sacred rite, it brought the blunt end of the limb towards its own shifting torso. A low, grinding sound came from within it, like rock settling. Then, with a sickening tear, a fissure opened in the muddy hide, revealing not bone or muscle, but a pulsating darkness shot through with streaks of phosphorescent green slime. From this opening, a thick, viscous fluid began to seep. Not blood, but a substance blacker than crude oil, shimmering with an unnatural iridescence. It stank of concentrated decay, of deep earth toxins, of graves opened after decades. The binatang extended its limb toward Celine, the black ichor welling in a crude, bowl-like depression formed by its own muddy flesh. Its ember eyes fixed on hers, burning with an unnerving intensity that was both command and plea. Drink. The guttural rasp vibrated through her bones. Revulsion, pure and instinctive, surged through Celine. To consume that, its very essence of rot, the lifeblood of the swamp's malignancy, it was abomination. Yet the hunger thwarted and furious screamed within her. The blistered pain in her wrist throbbed. The memory of Benji's fading life force, now forbidden, twisted like a knife. The binatang stood immobile, offering its own corrupted vitality. It hadn't attacked her, not truly. It had intervened. It had claimed her. And now it offered sustenance. Twisted, horrifying sustenance. Tears, hot and stinging, welled in Celine's yellow eyes, tracing paths through the fine scales beneath. A sob, raw and broken, tore from her throat. It was the sound of absolute despair, of a soul teetering on the edge of damnation. Driven by a need that eclipsed all reason, all instinct for self-preservation beyond the immediate, she stumbled forward. She fell to her knees in the sucking mud before the monstrous entity. Hesitating for only a heartbeat, choking on the stench, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to the pool of black ichor in the binatang's offered limb. The taste was indescribable. It was decay liquefied, bitterness incarnate, laced with the metallic tang of poison and the cloying sweetness of advanced putrefaction. It burned her mouth, her throat, a searing trail of corruption flooding into her. She gagged violently, her body convulsing in protest. But the binatong's limb held firm.
Out.
Desperation forced her to swallow. The effect was instantaneous and paradoxical. Agony lanced through her. Her veins felt like they were filling with liquid fire and ice simultaneously. The hunger, however, recoiled, not sated, but stunned, repelled. The gnawing void was filled not with warmth, but with a chilling, heavy numbness that spread through her core. It was sustenance born of poison, a stopgap measure that eased the immediate torment, while simultaneously polluting her from within. She drank, weeping uncontrollably, tears mingling with the foul ichor on her chin. Each swallow was an act of profound violation, a deeper surrender. Yet, as the burning numbness spread, a terrifying sense of connection flared. She felt the binatong's ancient alien presence not just around her, but within her. Its patient, possessive watchfulness. Its isolation that mirrored her own. Its understanding of the monstrous hunger that defined them both. When the last of the offered ichor was gone, leaving only a smear of iridescent slime on the muddy limb, Celine collapsed back, gasping, trembling from head to toe. The hunger was quieted, replaced by a sickening, pervasive coldness and the lingering taste of swamp death. Slowly, almost without conscious thought, her uninjured hand rose. Not in defense, not in revulsion. It moved with a life of its own, drawn by the terrifying intimacy of the moment. By the horrifying realization that this creature had just offered its own essence to spare an innocent, and to bind her tighter. Her talons, still sharp and black, trembled as they neared the shifting, muddy surface of the binatong's torso, near where the ember eyes burned. She touched it. The sensation was like plunging her hand into a grave. Cold, yielding earth, slimy roots, the squirm of unseen things. Yet beneath it pulsed a slow, powerful rhythm, a heartbeat older than the mountains. The binatang shuddered. Not a tremor of pain or anger, but a profound, visceral convulsion that rippled through its entire form. The ember eyes flared brighter, hotter, for a fleeting moment, not with menace, but with something raw and overwhelming. A terrible, ancient, undeniable longing. The ground beneath them seemed to sigh. Celine snatched her hand back as if scorched, the mud clinging to her talons like a brand. She stared at the creature, at the place where her touch had landed, then back at her own trembling hand. What had she done? The hunger was silenced, but the price was etched into her very soul, and the possessive embers in the darkness burned brighter than ever. The air in San Isidro changed. It wasn't just the lingering damp or the swamp's fetid breath. It thickened with a new kind of tension, sharp and metallic, like the edge of a freshly honed blade. Word traveled faster than the monsoon winds. Tomas had arrived. He wasn't just another superstitious villager clutching a bolo. He was Togapuglides, the deliverer. A man whose name was whispered with a mixture of reverence and dread in the mountain villages, a scarred testament to a lifetime spent hunting things that slithered in the dark. His reputation preceded him like a cold front. Tales of purified Aswang pyres, of silver bullets finding their mark in moonlit glades, its villages cleansed under his grim ministrations. His arrival wasn't announced, it was felt. A sudden hush fell over the marketplace. Conversations died mid-sentence. Children were pulled sharply indoors. Even the stray dogs seemed to slink deeper into the shadows, their tails tucked low. Celine felt it like a physical blow the moment his boot touched the muddy path. A wave of nausea washed over her, a deep, instinctual revulsion that had nothing to do with the binatong's ichor still chilling her veins. It was the stench of sanctity, of cold iron, and of death dealt methodically to things like her. It clung to him, an invisible miasma that made her human skin prickle and the Aswang within recoil, hissing silently. She saw him from the shadowed doorway of the Sarasari store. A man carved from weathered teak, lean and hard, draped in a worn oilskin coat despite the oppressive humidity. His face was a map of violence, a thick, puckered scar running from his left temple down to his jawline, pulling the corner of his mouth into a permanent, grim sneer. Another bisecting his right eyebrow. His eyes, however, were the worst. They weren't the fiery, hate-filled eyes of the village zealots. They were flat, gray, and utterly devoid of warmth or mercy. They scanned the surroundings with the detached precision of a butcher assessing stock, missing nothing. The salt-streaked doorways, the garlic braids, the wary faces, and then, inevitably, they found her. His gaze locked onto Celine. It didn't linger with suspicion or fleeting admiration like the village men. It pinned her. It was a look of pure, professional assessment. He didn't see a beautiful woman. He saw an anomaly, a flaw in the fabric of the human settlement. A predator instinctively recognizing another predator, but one he was born to exterminate. A flicker, cold and calculating, passed through those gray eyes. He didn't approach. He didn't need to. His presence was accusation enough. The villagers, emboldened, began to cluster around him, their whispers coalescing into a chorus of fear, directed squarely at Celine. Old Man Datu pointed a gnarled finger towards her hut, his voice trembling as he recounted finding strange, large footprints in the mud near his pig pen after the calf vanished. Aling Rosa spoke of the unnatural silence near Celine's home at night, the feeling of being watched from the bamboo grove. They spoke of Benji's sickness, the timing, the Aswang pallor. Tomas listened, his expression unchanging, a stony monument amidst the tide of their fear. He came at dusk, not with a mob, but alone, moving with the silent, lethal grace of a jungle cat. Celine, paralyzed by a terror deeper than any she'd felt facing the Binatang, watched from a crack in her wall as he approached her hut. He didn't knock. He simply stood before it, those flat gray eyes sweeping over the structure, the surrounding ground, the bamboo fence. He saw what she had prayed the rain would wash away. Deep, unnatural gouges in the mud near the doorstep where the boar had been dragged. Faint, greasy smears on the bamboo slats near the base, remnants of the python's scales or the Binatang's touch. The lingering, faint but unmistakable taint of corruption beneath the surface sense of earth and decay. His nostrils flared slightly. He knelt, his movements economical, and brushed his fingers over a patch of mud near the fence post where the duende had hung. He lifted his fingers, examining a trace of dark, viscous residue that wasn't mud. He sniffed it, his lip curling in a silent snarl of recognition. He didn't enter the hut. He didn't need to see the gore she tried to scrub away. The evidence was written on the threshold, in the air, in the very soil. He straightened, his gaze sweeping towards the dense bamboo grove where the ember eyes watched. He knew. Not everything, perhaps, but enough. Enough to confirm the whispers, enough to condemn. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low, gravelly, and carried with chilling clarity in the twilight hush, meant for the villagers who watched from a distance but slicing through Celine like a shard of ice. She asked the last. The finality in those 3 words was absolute, not a suspicion, a death sentence. The preparations began immediately. Tomas was a craftsman of death. He didn't rely on brute force or mob hysteria. His tools were insidious. Villagers brought him coils of thin, almost invisible wire. Not ordinary wire, but strands painstakingly braided with threads of pure silver, blessed by a mountain hermit known for his zealotry. Tomas worked with meticulous care, setting intricate snares along the paths leading from Selena's hut into the jungle, particularly near the cemetery ridge and the swamp's edge. The wires were strung at ankle and throat height for a running human, but positioned to entangle wings or limbs of something larger, something that might fly low or crash through the undergrowth. He smeared the wires with a sticky, foul-smelling paste rendered from the venom of a rare tree viper and consecrated oil, a concoction designed to burn and paralyze supernatural flesh. In strategic clearings, he planted sharpened bamboo stakes, their points hardened in fire and then dipped in molten silver, camouflaged under layers of wet leaves and loose earth. He set small, wicked-looking traps crafted from springy talahib grass and sharpened bone, triggered to snap shut with bone-crushing force. His final touch was a series of small, clay ampoules, filled with holy water, suspended like fragile fruit from branches overhanging the paths. Rigged to shatter upon disturbance, raining corrosive sanctity down on whatever passed beneath. He worked silently, efficiently, his scarred face impassive, sculptor building a cage of pain and holy fire around Selene's existence. That night, the Binatang watched Tomas's handiwork take shape. It observed from the deepest shadows, its ember eyes tracking the hunter's every move, sensing the sharp, ozone-like taint of the blessed silver. The acrid sting of the holy venom paste. It understood the purpose. This was not for wild boars or pythons. This was a trap for her. For its Selene. The possessive rage that simmered within its ancient core flared hotter, a counterpoint to the cold rot that defined it. It wouldn't let the hunter touch her. Selene, trapped within her hut, felt the closing net. The air vibrated with the latent threat of the traps, the holy energy emanating from the silver wires like a physical pressure against her skin. She knew she had to flee, but the paths were death. The hunger, temporarily silenced by the Binatang's foul gift, was a dull ache compared to the sharp terror Tomas inspired. She paced the cramped space, her human form feeling impossibly frail. The discarded monstrous skin in the corner, seeming like a mocking promise of strength she dared not embrace yet. The moon rose, a sliver of bone-white light piercing the clouds. Driven by a desperation that outweighed caution, she finally slipped out just before midnight. Intending to skirt the village entirely, to flee into the deepest, most trackless part of the mountains, even if it meant facing unknown horrors. She moved like a ghost in her human guise, bare feet silent on the mud, senses straining. She avoided the main path, cutting through a thicket of wild banana trees towards the ridge. She didn't see the wire until it was too late. It was strung taut between two saplings, glinting faintly in the weak moonlight. Silver, blessed. It caught her just above the ankle as she stepped through. The pain was instantaneous and excruciating. Not just a cut, but a searing holy fire that lanced up her leg. A choked cry escaped her lips as she stumbled, her leg going numb below the burning band. Panic seized her. She was trapped, exposed. The cry, though muffled, was enough. Before she could tear at the wire with frantic, already burning fingers, the earth beside the path surged. The Binatang erupted from the mud and leaf litter, not with its usual silent flow, but with a violent protective fury. It ignored Selene for a moment, its massive, mud-clotted limbs swinging down towards the taut silver wire trapping her. It grasped the wire directly, wrapping its earthy appendage around it. The effect was catastrophic. Where Selene felt burning pain, the Binatang experienced utter annihilation. Holy silver against its essence of primordial corruption was like acid meeting open flame. Terrible, sizzling hiss erupted, accompanied by a plume of acrid black smoke that reeked of burning peat and ozone. The wire bit deep into the muddy flesh, glowing with an unholy white light. The Binatang didn't scream. It unleashed a guttural, earth-rending roar of agony that shook the trees and sent birds exploding into the night sky in a panic. It wrenched its limb back with immense force, snapping the silver wire like a rotten thread, but the cost was horrific. Where the wire had touched, its limb was deeply scored, smoking the mud and vegetation charred black. A viscous, black ichor, thicker and darker than before, pulsed from the wound, steaming in the cool air. It shuddered violently, its ember eyes flickering like candles in a gale. Selene stared, frozen, the pain in her ankle forgotten in the face of the creature's sacrifice. It had deliberately taken the holy silver's full force to free her. The Binatang turned its massive head towards her, the agony evident in the trembling of its form, the frantic pulsing of its ember eyes. It made a low, gurgling sound, a command wordless but clear. Go. Then, with a staggering, pained motion, it began to flow back towards the deeper swamp, leaving a trail of steaming black ichor and the reek of its own seared flesh. She didn't hesitate. Limping, the blessed burn still radiating agony up her leg, she fled not towards the mountains, but after the retreating Binatang. It led her away from the village, away from Tomas's traps, deeper into the flooded lowlands than she'd ever ventured. They reached a hidden cave entrance, partially submerged by the swollen river, concealed behind a curtain of hanging vines and thick spiderwebs that parted wetly at the Binatang's passage. Inside, the air was cool, damp, and thick, with the smell of wet stone and the creature's own potent decay. Moonlight filtered weakly through a fissure in the roof, illuminating the Binatang slumped against the cave wall, its injured limb held close to its shifting torso. The wound was hideous, deep, charred, weeping the thick black blood that seemed to be its life force. Trembling, driven by a terrifying mix of gratitude, horror, and a dawning incomprehensible connection. Celine approached. Her monstrous nature surged close, her eyes shifting to yellow in the gloom, her talons extending. The binatang watched her, its ember eyes dimmed with pain, but still fixed on her. She knelt beside the steaming wound. The stench of seared rot and holy corrosion was overwhelming, making her eyes water. She had no herbs, no salves. What did one do for a creature made of swamp and shadow? Hesitantly, driven by an instinct she didn't understand, she reached out. Using her talons not as weapons but as delicate tools, she began to carefully scrape away the charred. Brittle fragments of mud and vegetation fused to the wound by the silver's burn. It was a gruesome task. The ichor welled thickly, hot against her talons. She worked as gently as she could, her movements awkward, her own ankle throbbing in sympathy. Tears, unbidden, began to stream down her face, tracing paths through the fine scales that had emerged on her cheeks. They weren't tears of pity, not exactly. They were tears of shared agony, of profound isolation, of the sheer, terrifying absurdity of an Aswang tending to a binatang. Her tears fell freely, mingling with the black ichor oozing from the wound, creating tiny, dark rivulets that ran down the creature's limb. The binatang remained utterly still, its gaze fixed on her face, the pain in its ember eyes seeming to soften, replaced by a profound, unnerving intensity. When she finally paused, the worst of the fused debris cleared, she looked up, meeting its gaze. The cave was silent, except for the drip of water and her own ragged breathing. The question tore from her, raw and broken, echoing the confusion and fear and dawning, terrifying realizations swirling within her. Why? Why intervene? Why take the holy silver meant for her? Why endure this agony? The binatang shifted slightly. Its massive form seemed to settle. From deep within its chest cavity, a sound emerged, low and resonant, vibrating the stone beneath them. Not a gurgle, not a growl. A single, labored syllable pushed out with immense effort. Thick with swamp water and pain, yet carrying a weight that shook Celine to her core. A word that explained the sacrifices, the watchfulness, the agony endured. A word that bound her to it more irrevocably than any chain of silver or swamp rot ever could. Love. The cave became a fragile sanctuary, a damp womb of stone holding the impossible. An Aswang and a binatang, bound by a declaration that echoed in the silence like a blasphemy. The word love hung between them, thick and cloying as the cave's own stagnant air, yet undeniable in its seismic resonance. Celine tended the binatang's seared limb, the charred wound a grotesque testament to its sacrifice. The holy silver had bitten deep. The edges remained brittle, weeping slow tears of viscous black ichor that smelled of scorched earth and deep corruption. Her own ankle throbbed where the wire had burned, a constant, low-grade agony mirroring the creature's greater torment. Days blurred. Tomas's presence was a suffocating pressure even at a distance, a tightening vice around San Isidro. The villagers moved like hunted things themselves, their fear sharpened by the hunter's grim certainty. Whispers slithered, not just of the Aswang now, but of the other thing, the shadow in the swamp that defied their understanding. Tomas knew they were linked. His traps hadn't yielded Celine. But they had drawn blood. Binatang blood. That failure would only make him more relentless, more brutal. Celine knew flight was their only chance. But the binatang was grievously wounded, its movements sluggish, its ancient energy diminished by the holy corrosion festering in its limb. Its ember eyes, though still fixed on her with that unnerving intensity, burned lower, dimmed by pain. The hunter's net was woven too tight around the village. The paths bristled with unseen, sanctified death. They needed a diversion, a cataclysm to shatter Tomas's meticulous cage. They needed chaos. Tomas provided it. He understood patience, but he also understood terror's accelerant. He saw the villagers' resolve hardening into suspicion, directed not just at Celine, but at his own methods. He saw the flicker of doubt when the promised capture hadn't materialized. He needed a spectacle, a cleansing fire to purge the doubt and flush the prey into the open. The cane fields. They stretched behind San Isidro like a dry, rustling sea, vast and ripe. Tomas didn't consult, he commanded. Under the guise of clearing land for replanting and purging vermin, he orchestrated the inferno. Villagers, faces grim with fear or zealous fervor, were handed torches soaked in pungent, blessed oil, oil infused with crushed lagundi leaves and sambong blossoms, herbs known for their cleansing properties against evil spirits. Tomas himself moved along the perimeter, chanting low, guttural prayers in a dialect older than the Spanish friars, swinging a heavy, antique batong incense burner that billowed smoke smelling of frankincense, myrrh, and something sharper, more metallic. The smoke curled upwards, forming a hazy, sanctified canopy under the twilight sky. This wasn't just fire, it was a weaponized exorcism. The first torch touched dry cane. The effect was instantaneous. A soft whoosh rippled through the field, then a crackling roar as flames, hungry and yellow-orange, leaped skyward, devouring the dry stalks with terrifying speed. The blessed oil ensured it spread not just horizontally, but with an unnatural, clinging intensity, the smoke thick and acrid, carrying the scent of sanctified destruction. The wind, fickle and treacherous, turned Tomas's weapon into a wildfire. It didn't just burn, it drove. Walls of flame 10 feet high roared towards the jungle's edge, towards the ridge, towards the swamp, towards every conceivable escape route Celine and her monstrous guardian might take. The sky turned the color of a fresh bruise, stained hellish red by the reflected inferno. Embers, glowing like malignant fireflies, rode the superheated currents, raining down on the thatched roofs of outlying huts, threatening to consume San Isidro itself in the hunter's zeal. The air grew thick, hot and hard to breathe, filled with the roar of the flames, the panicked screams of villagers trying to save their homes, the terrified bellowing of livestock, and the sickening sweet stench of burning sugar cane mingling with the sharp tang of holy incense. Trapped in the cave, the heat reached them first, a dry, suffocating wave rolling through the entrance. Then came the smoke, thick and choking, carrying the unmistakable taint of sanctified herbs and oil. Celine choked, her eyes watering. The binatang stirred, a low, pained rumble vibrating from its core. Its ember eyes flared, reflecting the hellish glow painting the cave entrance. It understood. The hunter wasn't just burning fields, he was burning their world. Their sanctuary was a death trap, soon to be an oven or choked by toxic fumes. They had to move. Now, Celine shed her human skin with frantic speed, the transformation agonizingly quick, bones cracking, wings unfurling with a leathery snap. The binatang heaved itself upright, its movements stiff, its wounded limb held awkwardly, dripping ichor onto the stone. It was visibly weakened, the ember light in its eyes flickering erratically. Together they plunged into the smoke-choked night. Chaos reigned outside. The world was a nightmare canvas of fire and shadow. The heat was a physical assault, searing Selena's exposed wings, making the binatong's muddy hide steam. The roar of the flames was deafening, punctuated by the sharp crack of exploding bamboo and the panicked shouts of villagers forming desperate bucket brigades, their faces masks of soot and terror. Embers stung like angry wasps. The jungle edge was a wall of fire. The paths towards the mountains shimmering with heat, haze, and dancing flames. The only direction not entirely consumed was towards the river, downstream, where the mangroves formed a sodden, labyrinthine buffer. To reach it, they had to cross an open stretch of scorched earth near the burning fields, exposed under the blood-red sky. They moved low, Celine half flying, half fronting, her wings beating against the hot, turbulent air, the binatang flowing beside her. A hulking shadow of mud and pain, they skirted the worst of the flames, smoke stinging their eyes, the blessed taint in the air making Selena's skin crawl and the binatang emit low, pained gurgles. They were almost across the open ground, the relative dampness of the mangroves, a dark promise ahead, when the figure materialized from the swirling smoke and dancing shadows near a still-standing cluster of bamboo. Tomas, he stood like a statue carved from obsidian and contempt, silhouetted against the inferno. His oilskin coat was gone, revealing a torso crisscrossed with leather straps holding silvered blades and clay ampoules. His face, lit from below by the raging flames, was a demonic mask. The scars like trenches of shadow, his gray eyes reflecting the fire with cold, calculated fury. He held not a torch, but a heavy, compact crossbow, its stock dark wood inlaid with silver sigils, the bolt already nocked. The tip gleamed wickedly in the firelight, pure silver, honed to a razor point, etched with intricate prayer symbols. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His eyes locked onto Celine, the winged horror revealed in the hellish glow. There was no fear, only the predatory focus of a hunter with his quarry finally cornered. He raised the crossbow in one smooth, practiced motion. Celine saw the intent, saw the silver death aimed at her heart. She tried to veer, wings beating desperately, but the smoke choked her, the heat distorted the air. She was exposed, a perfect target against the backdrop of fire. The bolt released with a sharp, deadly thwack. Time seemed to slow. Celine braced for the searing impact, the holy annihilation. But a massive, mud-slicked form surged in front of her. The binatang, moving with agonizing speed, fueled by pure, protective instinct, threw itself into the bolt's path. Burying itself deep into the binatang's already wounded limb, right where the holy silver wire had seared it days before. The impact was horrific. It wasn't just the physical penetration. It was the holy silver meeting the deep, festering wound, already saturated with corruption. A blinding flash of white light erupted from the point of impact, accompanied by a sizzling, tearing sound, like wet cloth being ripped apart. A shockwave of pure sanctity, amplified by the sacred symbols on the bolt and Tomas's focused will, detonated within the binatang's essence. The creature didn't roar. It screamed, a sound that wasn't sound, but a psychic wave of pure, adulterated agony that ripped through the night, momentarily drowning out the roar of the fire. It staggered, its massive form convulsing violently. Black ichor erupting from the wound in a steaming geyser, splattering Celine's wings and face with its burning, corrupted lifeblood. Celine didn't think. Rage, terror, and a grief, so profound it felt like her own heart had been pierced, exploded within her. She launched herself not at Tomas, but towards the reeling, mortally wounded binatang. She reached it as it began to collapse. Its ember eyes dimming rapidly, flickering like dying coals. She threw her wings around its shuddering bulk, a futile attempt to shield it. Her talons digging into the muddy hide not to hurt, but to hold on. Her own cry, a piercing shriek of anguish and defiance, ripped from her throat, echoing the binatang's dying scream. Tomas, momentarily stunned by the binatang's sacrifice and the psychic backlash of its agony, fumbled for another bolt. But the tableau before him was seared into the minds of the villagers who had witnessed it. The beautiful winged demon, her face contorted in inhuman grief, cradling the massive convulsing form of the swamp beast that had shielded her with its own body. Their monstrous forms entwined, illuminated by the hellish glow of the burning fields, covered in the same steaming dark blood. It was a vision of unholy union, of devotion beyond human comprehension, of a love forged in wrought and shadow, now shattered on the pyre of holy fire. Fear curdled into something deeper, more primal, a sense of witnessing something ancient, profane, and terrifyingly real.
Ow.
They didn't see prey and predator anymore. They saw entwined tragedy. They saw a pact written in blood and sacrifice. And as the binatang shuddered its last, collapsing fully, its massive form beginning to slump into the mud, its ember eyes fading to dull, lifeless stone, Selina's shriek rose into a sustained, soul-rending keen that seemed to make the very flames falter. The hunter had won the battle, but the cost, painted in fire, smoke, and monstrous devotion, was a horror that would haunt San Isidro long after the last ember died. The world shrank to the cold, damp stone beneath Selina's knees, and the massive, shuddering weight collapsing against her. The psychic echo of the binatang's death scream still vibrated in her bones, a silent resonance more profound than the roaring inferno outside the cave's meager shelter. Tomas's silver bolt wasn't merely embedded. It was a conduit for holy annihilation, detonating within the deep, festering wound the hunter's earlier snare had carved. The blinding flash had seared Selina's retinas, leaving ghostly after-images dancing before her yellow eyes. The stench was overwhelming. The acrid reek of sanctified silver burning corrupted flesh. The cloying sweetness of the burning fields carried on the smoky wind, and beneath it all, the thick, primal stink of the binatang's lifeblood. Hot and steaming as it gushed over her wings, her talons, her face, burning like acid where it touched her scales. She held on, wings wrapped desperately around the convulsing bulk, her talons digging into the muddy hide not to hurt, but to anchor herself against the tidal wave of agony and loss crashing over her. She felt the immense power within the creature, the ancient, patient strength that had defied the swamp's depths for centuries, flicker and gutter like a candle in a hurricane. Its massive form wasn't just collapsing, it was dissolving. The mud and vegetation that composed its body seemed to lose cohesion, sloughing away in thick, wet clumps, revealing glimpses of a darker, more viscous core beneath, pulsating weakly. The ember eyes, once beacons of terrifying intelligence and possessive longing, were dimming rapidly. The fierce red glow faded to a dull, smoldering orange. Then, to the weak flicker of banked coals, casting grotesque, dancing shadows on the cave walls. Each shudder that racked its frame felt like an earthquake tearing through her own being. The gurgling, wet sounds emanating from its core were no longer words or roars, but the death rattle of something primordial being unmade from the inside out. The holy silver wasn't just killing it. It was erasing it, unraveling the very essence that bound swamp rot and vengeful spirit into the terrifying entity that had claimed her. Tomas approached. His footsteps were heavy, deliberate, crunching on the scattered debris near the cave entrance. The crossbow hung loosely at his side now, replaced by a long, wickedly curved attack knife, its edge gleaming silver in the firelight reflecting off the cave walls. His face was a mask of grim satisfaction, etched deep with the lines of a lifetime spent extinguishing monsters. The fierce joy of the hunt burned in his gray eyes, undimmed by the horrific spectacle before him. To him, the binatang sacrifice wasn't tragic devotion. It was a beast's instinct, an obstacle removed. Celine, cradling the dying monstrosity, covered in its foul blood, was the true prize. The last Kwentong Aswang, its ultimate vindication. He stopped a few paces away, the silvered knife held ready, his gaze fixed on Celine with the cold focus of a butcher eyeing his next cut. "Foul thing," he rasped, his voice rough with smoke and triumph. "Your protector is sludge. Now you face the light." Took another step, his boots scraping loudly on the stone. The sanctified aura radiating from him, amplified by the symbols on his blade, and the fervor in his heart pressed against Celine like a physical weight, making her monstrous skin crawl and sizzle faintly where the binatang's ichor still clung. Celine didn't look up immediately. Her world was the shallow, labored breaths rattling within the binatang's collapsing chest cavity, the agonizingly slow fade of the ember light in its eyes. The serpent of hunger within her was silent, drowned out by a vast, hollow grief that threatened to swallow her whole. She had spent a lifetime hiding, surviving, defined by the gnawing void inside and the crushing weight of being the last of her cursed kind. This creature, born of swamp and shadow, had seen past the monster and the mask to the profound isolation beneath. It had offered gruesome gifts, endured holy fire, and finally taken a bolt meant for her heart. Its declaration, love, resonated now, not as an absurdity, but as the only pure truth in her damned existence. And it was dying, dissolving into the cold mud of this sacred cave, a place her own ancestors might have once sought refuge. Now becoming a tomb, the binatang's remaining eye, a mere pinprick of fading orange light, shifted weakly. It found Selena's face, streaked with its own black blood and her tears. A final, almost imperceptible tremor ran through its form. From deep within, a sound emerged, not a gurgle, but a faint, wet sigh that carried a single, desperate syllable, pushed out with the last vestiges of its will. Live, ... It was a plea, a command, a final gift. Live, escape the hunter, survive. For both of them, the word shattered something within Celine. The hollow grief ignited, transforming into a white-hot core of rage that burned away the paralyzing despair. The sanctified aura pressing down on her suddenly felt like an insult, a violation of this sacred space of monstrous death.
Ow.
Her grief wasn't human. It was Aswang fury, ancient and cold, born of extinction and injustice. She slowly raised her head, her yellow eyes locking onto Tomas's gray ones. The tears still streamed, but they were tears of molten rage now, tracing paths through the gore on her scaled cheeks. Her wings still draped over the binatang's shuddering form, tensed. A low growl, deeper and more feral than any sound she'd ever made, vibrated in her chest, echoing ominously in the cavern. Tomas saw the change. The satisfaction in his eyes flickered, replaced by a flicker of primal caution. He tightened his grip on the silvered attack, raising it defensively. "Stay back, abomination. Your end is never finished." Celine moved. It wasn't flight. It was a lunge powered by coiled muscle and utter consuming wrath. She launched herself from the binatong's side, wings snapping open for balance, talons outstretched like obsidian daggers, aimed straight for the hunter's throat. The cave air shrieked around her. Tomas reacted with the speed of ingrained instinct, bringing the silvered blade up in a desperate parry. Silver met obsidian talon with a shower of sparks and a hideous screech. The holy metal burned Celine's talons, sending jolts of agony up her arms, but her momentum was unstoppable. She crashed into him, her weight and fury driving him backwards. They slammed against the cave wall, Tomas grunting with the impact, the breath driven from his lungs. They grappled in the dim, smoky light, a whirlwind of snapping fangs, slashing talons, and the deadly arc of the silvered attack. Tomas was strong, skilled, fueled by righteous fury. He twisted, trying to bring the knife down, aiming for her wing joint, her neck. Celine fought with the feral desperation of a cornered beast, her grief channeled into every strike, her movements a blur of leathery wings and snapping jaws. She felt the sting of the silver as it grazed her shoulder, the holy fire searing her flesh. She raked her talons across his forearm, drawing deep, bloody furrows that made him curse. The cave echoed with their snarls, the clash of unnatural flesh against blessed steel, the wet, heavy breathing of the dying binatang mere feet away. Tomas managed to shove her off, creating a sliver of space. His free hand scrabbled at his belt, fingers closing not on another blade, but on the heavy, silver-plated crease pistol holstered there. He yanked it free, his movements frantic, his eyes wide with a dawning realization that this Aswang was fighting not just for survival, but for vengeance. He brought the gun up, the barrel wavering slightly as he aimed it point-blank at Selena's chest. Before his finger could tighten on the trigger, the mound of mud and shadow that was the binatang erupted in a final, impossible surge. It wasn't a movement of the body, which was collapsing into inert sludge. It was a projection of pure, possessive will, a last concentrated burst of the ancient fury and devotion that had defined its existence. With a sound like a mudslide engulfing a forest, the remnants of its form lunged. It wasn't an attack aimed to kill. It was a sacrifice aimed to intercept. The massive, dissolving mass slammed into Tomas just as he fired. The gunshot was deafening in the confined space. The silver bullet, meant for Selena's heart, tore instead into the binatang's collapsing torso, punching through mud and viscous core matter, but the force of the creature's final lunge was catastrophic. Tomas was thrown off his feet with bone-jarring force, the pistol flying from his grasp, clattering across the stone floor. The binatang's momentum carried it forward, pinning the hunter beneath its immense, liquefying weight. Tomas screamed, a raw sound of terror and agony, as the putrid mass engulfed him, the corrosive ichor seeping into his clothes, burning his skin. The creature's massive, crumbling head, the ember eye now a dull, lifeless gray stone, hung mere inches above his face. Its distended, muddy jaw, perhaps by final instinct, perhaps by collapsing muscle, fell open. The last thing Tomas, the deliverer, the scourge of Aswang, saw was the cavern roof stained red by the distant fire, framed by the dripping, needle-sharp fangs of the binatang descending towards his exposed throat. He had time for one choked, gurgling cry before the jaws, powered by the last vestiges of the creature's monstrous strength and undying possessiveness, clamped shut with the finality of a landslide sealing a tomb. The sound was sickening, a wet crunch of bone and cartilage abruptly silenced. The binatang's massive form settled, a final tremor running through it, then absolute stillness. Its weight pressed down, heavy and final, on the hunter who had sought to end them both. The ember eyes were extinguished. The cave fell silent, save for the crackle of distant flames, the drip of water, and Selena's own ragged, tear-choked breathing. She stood frozen, staring at the mound of cooling mud and shadow entombing the hunter. The silvered attack lay nearby, gleaming dully. The pistol rested against the far wall. The rage that had fueled her drained away, leaving her hollow, trembling, and utterly alone. The binatang was gone. Truly gone. Its final act hadn't been survival, but sacrifice. It had silenced the hunter, but for her. Because of the impossible, terrifying word it had rasped in this very cave. Love. From beneath the crushing weight of mud and death, Tomas's legs twitched once, a final spasm, then lay still. A dark pool, a mixture of human blood and black binatang ichor, began to seep from beneath the mound, spreading slowly across the cave floor toward Celine's feet. The silence deepened, heavy with the stench of blood, rot, holy fire, and the profound, echoing absence of the creature who had defied the swamp-s depths, only to perish for the last Kwentong Aswang. The choice had been made, the price paid in full. Celine was free. But the freedom tasted of ashes, and the coppery tang of a love born in shadow and sealed in monstrous sacrifice. The cave, once a sanctuary, was now a charnel house, and the weight of the binatang's final, guttural sigh. Yours. Settled on her shoulders like a shroud woven from darkness and despair. Freedom tasted like the thick, metallic sludge congealing on the cave floor. Tomas's blood mingled with the binatang's final, spent ichor. The silence in the sacred cave was a living thing, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the relentless drip of water from the fissured ceiling and the ragged, shuddering breaths tearing from Celine's own throat. The air hung thick with the cloying sweetness of distant burning cane, the sharp sting of gunpowder, the pervasive reek of swamp rot, and the fresh, horrifying tang of violent death. The mound of cooling mud and shadow that entombed Tomas seemed to absorb the weak moonlight filtering through the roof, a shapeless monument to monstrous sacrifice. The binatang was gone, not just dead but unmade. The holy silver had done its work thoroughly, reducing the ancient entity to inert sludge, its terrifying presence extinguished, leaving only the crushing weight of its absence and the echo of its final guttural sigh. Yours. The word resonated in the hollow cavern of Celine's being. Yours, not just its devotion, but its death, its sacrifice. The weight of it pressed down on her, heavier than the mountain above. She was free. Tomas was dead, his zealous light snuffed out beneath the weight of the darkness he hunted. The hunter's net was shattered. She could flee. Fly far beyond the Cordilleras, beyond the reach of San Isidro's fear. Find some forgotten corner of the world to eke out a wretched existence. The serpent of hunger stirred weakly within her, a familiar gnawing ache beneath the overwhelming numbness of grief. The thought of flight, of simply leaving, felt like a deeper betrayal than any she had yet committed. Her yellow eyes, still streaming tears, that carved pale tracks through the grime and gore on her scaled face, fixed on the mound, not on Tomas's entombed form, but on the place where the binatang's massive head had rested before its final lunge. Amidst the dissolving mud, something glinted dully, catching the faint light, not silver, not bone, something darker, denser, a fragment of its core perhaps, something that had resisted the holy annihilation. Driven by an impulse she couldn't name, Celine stumbled forward, ignoring the slick, treacherous floor. She fell to her knees beside the mound, her talons, still smeared with Tomas's blood and the binatang's ichor, scrabbling at the cool, wet mud. Her claws found it. Not a fragment, but the heart. Or what passed for one in the entity born of swamp and spirit. It was roughly the size of her fist, a lump of obsidian black stone, shot through with veins of iridescent green slime that pulsed with a faint, fading luminescence. It was warm to the touch, radiating a residual heat that felt ancient and alien, vibrating with a low, almost imperceptible hum against her talons. It felt impossibly heavy, not physically, but psychically. Holding it was like holding a dying star forged from primordial corruption and desperate devotion. It was the last condensed essence of the creature that had defied definition, that had seen her loneliness and mirrored it, that had offered gruesome gifts and endured holy fire, that had declared an impossible love and sealed it with its own dissolution. She couldn't leave it here, not in this cave of death, not for Tomas's men to find and desecrate, or for the earth to slowly reclaim. Clutching the heavy, pulsing stone heart against her own chest, Its residual warmth seeping through her scales, Selene rose. She ignored the silvered weapons lying discarded, symbols of a war that had cost everything. She turned her back on the tomb of hunter and protector, and fled the cave. Dawn was a bloody smear on the horizon when she found the place. Deep within the primordial jungle, far beyond the reach of the burning fields, far from the taint of San Isidro, where the trees grew so tall and thick their canopy blotted out the sky, and the air hung perpetually green and damp. Giant ferns unfurled like prehistoric banners, and thick vines, some as thick as a man's thigh, draped from the towering Nara and Bolete trees. The ground was soft, blanketed in centuries of decaying leaves, muffling all sound. It smelled of rich, loam damp moss, and the sweet, heavy perfume of rare orchids blooming unseen in the gloom. It felt untouched, sacred, not in the way of human gods, but in the way of the world before men, before hunters, before Aswangs. Here, beneath the vast, moss-draped roots of an ancient Bolete tree, a tree rumored to be a gateway to the spirit world, Selene dug. She used her talons, tearing through the soft earth and layers of humus. The hole didn't need to be deep. The jungle would reclaim it swiftly. She placed the Binatong stone heart gently into the dark soil. It pulsed once, a weak green flash in the dimness, then lay still, its luminescence fading, but its weight, its presence, undeniable. She covered it, pressing the damp earth down with her hands, not her talons. She didn't speak. Words felt hollow, human things incapable of encompassing the monstrous gratitude, the profound grief, the terrifying love that bound her to this piece of petrified swamp essence. Instead, she bowed her head, her wings drooping around her like a funeral shroud, and let the silence of the ancient jungle absorb her sorrow. She didn't flee the mountains. She couldn't. San Isidro was a wound, but the Cordilleras were her bones. Her prison, and now her only connection to the entity slumbering beneath the Bolete. She became a ghost, haunting the high, mist-shrouded peaks and the deepest untouched valleys. She shed her human skin permanently. The beautiful girl who charmed the market was ash, burned away in the pyre of the Binatong's sacrifice. She lived as the monster she was, but a monster forever changed. The hunger remained, a constant companion. But she hunted only the most remote game. Wild deer in the cloud forests, giant fruit bats in hidden caves. She avoided humans utterly. The memory of Benji's fading life force and the Binatong's guttural knot. Innocent, a commandment etched in her soul. She drank animal blood, but it was ash in her mouth, a poor imitation of the life she craved, and a bitter reminder of the corrupted ichor she'd consumed, a poison-laced gift that still chilled her veins. Mosses. Men found the cave eventually. They found the hunter's crushed, partially dissolved body beneath the mound of inert mud, his throat torn out by monstrous jaws. They found the discarded silvered weapons. They found signs of a terrible struggle. And they found no trace of the winged Aswang. They carried Tomas's broken remains back to San Isidro, a grim trophy that only deepened the village's terror. The story crystallized, growing in the telling. The Kwentong Aswang and her demon lover. The burning fields, the final battle in the sacred cave where the deliverer fell, torn apart by the swamp beast defending its monstrous bride. They spoke of Selene vanishing into the storm, a vengeful spirit. They declared the Binatang rotting back into the earth, defeated. But deep in the jungle, beneath the ancient Bolete, the earth did not forget. And neither did Selene. On nights when the moon was a thin, cold sliver, or hidden entirely behind storm clouds, she would return. A silent, winged wraith moving through the dripping trees, she would kneel by the patch of disturbed earth. No marker stood there, but she knew. The air around the Bolete always felt different, heavier, quieter, charged with a low hum that resonated in her bones. A faint echo of the Stoneheart's pulse. She wouldn't speak. She would simply kneel, her head bowed, her wings folded tight. And then she would sing. It wasn't a human song. It was a dirge woven from the sounds of the jungle itself. The low groan of shifting trees, the sigh of the wind through high leaves. The gurgle of hidden streams, the chirp of nocturnal insects, all twisted into a melody both haunting and profoundly alien. It was a lament in a language forgotten by men. A language of roots and rot in ancient stones, a song of loneliness, of monstrous love, of sacrifice that bound two damned souls beyond death. Her voice, raw and echoing, carried through the still, dark woods, a sound that made even the boldest forest creatures fall utterly silent. The villagers of San Isidro, generations later, still speak of the Aswang and the demon who loved her. They tell it to wide-eyed children, a warning etched in fear. Never wander near Mount Tiger after dark, especially not near the old bolete groves deep in the primordial jungle, for the jungle remembers. They say, if you listen, really listen, in the silence between the cricket songs, when the wind dies, and the world holds its breath, you might hear it. Not just the mournful keening of the winged wraith, but the earth itself whispering back, a low resonant hum beneath your feet, a vibration in the ancient stones, a sigh that sounds like whetstones grinding together. Deep within the black water of a forgotten swamp, it's the sound of a love that refused to die with the body, a possessive devotion that seeped into the very bones of the land. It's the curse of memory, the eternal echo of the Binatong's final guttural promise, yours. And on the stillest, darkest nights, the villagers swear, it doesn't sound like one voice answering the song, but two,